We are recording on Zoom. All right. 3, 2, 1. Hello. Welcome to the Korean American Heritage Podcast. I am Han, and I am here with Flip. And
Hello.
We have a very special guest, Diann. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Diann and I we're on the phone talking about her search for, I guess, her heritage seeking journey. And so I thought it would be important to share with the audience as to those, because your heritage seeking journey is very extraordinary in regards to the roots to the early pioneers in Mexico. And so perhaps you could introduce yourself, and I'll throw in some questions to help along with the conversation, and Flip will chime in with his historical expertise. So
no pressure, right? No. So my name is Diann Rowland. I'm a fourth generation Korean American Mayan English person. I'm a mutt when it wasn't very common to be a mutt. I mean, Flip is the OG, but I'm like mini OG. And the search started. My grandfather was 100% Korean. He was born in Mexico, so he was the first child to be born of my great grandparents that came on the Ilford with their 3 children. The family's from Busan, but when my great-grandparents left, they had 4 children, and something happened to the eldest by the time they got to Mexico. So none of this story, I didn't know any of it. We never really asked. My grandfather never really talked about it. In Spanish, there's a word called consentida, which means favorite, beloved, and I was my grandfather's consentida. We had a very special bond. I was like his little shadow. I was with him all the time. And so when I first found out about this story, I kind of became pretty just obsessed with it, and just really kind of was embarrassed that I knew so little about my own heritage. But I think I didn't think that, first of all, I didn't realize how unique we were. And then also there's a lot of pain and tragedy in the story that people don't want to talk about.
Right.
So how I got to where I am now is my mom's 83 now with dementia, and she lives with me. And we've been just trying to make the most out of the time we have left. So that's been a lot of fun travel, and Merida was on her list. And so we went back, and we had kind of heard about this museum in Merida, but didn't really know anything about it. And when we were there, we visited the museum, which was actually closed for remodeling. So you can imagine that we were a little disappointed that we got there and there's a sign on the door. But the woman that works there, her name's Dolores Garcia. She let us in, and she told us a story, and she pulled out some pictures for us. And one of the first ones she picked out was my grandfather.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
so it really felt like
You were destined to be there.
Yeah, and destined to kind of do this search for him and for our family. And so it was just kind of mind-blowing, right? So we end up visiting a Henneken hacienda, to see the work that they did, which I thought was going to be really painful, but it was actually kind of cathartic, because the way that they did the hacienda, it's a working museum, but it pays homage to the workers. Not so much the haciendados. So that was cool for us to actually see what the Henneken looked like, what it felt like, the process that they actually had to work when they first got there. So then I came back home with this incredible story that I not only didn't know about, but didn't know that I was a part of. And Flip was one of the first people that I reached out to, because Tosan is such an important part of the story. Like, he really came down in 1917 and 1918 and took a break from his work here and all over the rest of the world to check on the Koreans in Mexico, because everyone knew that their circumstance was difficult and painful, and that they were suffering. And I think his presence there was so important to educate them, to elevate the women to a certain extent, not much, but some.
That's true.
And also just kind of organize and inspire and teach. And yeah, so then Flip just has been so generous with sharing so much information with me to kind of help me wrap around the historical context. And then the other part of my journey has been putting together my family history and my family tree.
That's good. That's
so,
good.
So how early were you when you first heard the word, when you first heard about Korea? I mean, like, when did you understood, like, oh, my grandfather is of a Korean descent and such?
Oh, that was early on. I mean, there was never, I never didn't know that I wasn't Korean. Everybody else didn't know that I was Korean because of what I look like. But my grandfather, you know, and that's what's so interesting, the identity question. Like, we were always very proud to be Korean, and then now knowing that it had kind of a deeper meaning, right? And in Mexico, they call us all Chino, which is Chinese.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a derogatory term, and also because they could care less what we are. You could be Filipino, Chinese, Japanese, all the same to them, right? So they just call you Chino, and they call my grandfather Chino, they call my mom Chino, and we would always respond, we're Korean. And so now to know, like, the Japanese occupation and what that meant for our people to say, not only are we not Korean, we're not Japanese citizens, we don't recognize that sovereignty. You know, that history is so important, and in such a beautiful kind of, you know, the Korean spirit of saying, yeah, no thanks, dude. Stay there.
One of the experience I had with the term Chino, I was in the middle of Baja, and just at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. And I'm in my van with two other guys, and we're going for a couple weeks to go surfing. And we stopped at a Pemex gas station. I mean, with the old pumps, and I mean, and this guy on the other side is in a truck, and he's looking at me, and just like you said, he goes, Chino. And I go, no, I'm not Chinese. And he goes, me Chino, you Chino. So he was Chinese and Mexican. And so, you know, we're determined to go surfing. We're on our way, but this guy was so nice. And he invited us to his little rancho for lunch, you know? And I'm telling these guys, I go, this is going to be an experience that you'll never, ever have again. And so we went down these dirt roads and had lunch and just talked. And it was just, but it was, for him, it was like, oh my God, here's another person that's part Asian, you know, because he's out in the middle of nowhere. But, my mom used to talk about, you know, being called chink or whatever in her age, but nobody knew what a Korean was. And so, you know, I'm sure up until, you know, a certain time, I'm sure the Koreans were known more for their washing machines and refrigerators in Mexico than they were for their culture at first. Because when I went to Costa Rica, I was shocked. I went, oh my God, here's all the Samsung and LG appliance stores, and that's where they were making their money before they got into the American market. But that's interesting. No, I remember when Diann got a hold of me, and I'm going, yeah, I mean, I know some of this stuff, and she also got my opinionated versions of things too. But no, yeah, I mean, you really have been successful at what you started out without knowing anything. Another thing that was funny was on Tuesday, a couple days ago, and I think you should have these two women on a podcast as well, and maybe with you, because I told them that, you know, about things that I do, and one of the things was working with history of Merida and its Korean situations and stuff, and they didn't know. One is Taiwanese background, ethnicity, and the other is a Korean who immigrated to Canada, but she went to USC. And so I said, yeah, I said you were part Korean and Caucasian, and I said Mayan, and both of them just went like, Mayan? I mean, I thought that was just like in the movies. You mean she's Korean and Mayan? And they were like, we got to talk to her, because they're doing a book about women, Asian American women, role model hero types, or just, positive stories. They're geared at younger, I think, like teenage and like maybe like middle school and high school. But it was funny because they had no idea. I mean, they knew about my mom, but they had no idea what else went with it. And I think that girl from Canada should also talk to Rachel, because they're on this education pathway, which is good. Which, I mean, you've been real successful at it. That's great.
Diann, could you elaborate more on the Mayan and Korean connection?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad Flip brought that up because, we knew we were Mayan. Well, Yucatan has a very interesting identity, right? It was almost kind of separatist from Mexico. It's a different vibe, it's a different feel, it's a different indigenous population. And it is Mayan. And my grandmother was Mayan, but never really talked about it. And the caste system and the caste war, half of the Mayan population was killed because they had revolted for the labor rights and the conditions that the Koreans would come and work in 1905. But the dark skin, the indigenous, there's a denial in the culture, and it's funny because people don't believe that I am Mayan, so when I say it, it's like a joke to them, but it's not to me. And now that we have all this DNA analysis, I have a proof, right, that I'm not just culturally appropriating, that I'm not pretending to be something that I'm not. But what happened in the Mayan population, so the Koreans get there, and the Mayans are laborers side by side with them on the Henequen haciendas. And Mayan, it appears that Mayan was the first language that the Koreans learned.
Wow, really?
Wow.
And I met this really cool linguist who's also he's married to a descendant. His name's David Bowles. I was telling you about him, Flip.
Oh, it's great that you hooked up with him.
But here's the crazy part, is that when he's talking about the analysis of the Mayan language in Korean, he's found similarities in the ending of the consonants and in the emphasis on certain syllables. And I was sitting there going, wait, what? And so it was very natural for the Koreans to learn Mayan first. And then they learned Spanish as they started entering the educational system and started advancing socioeconomically. But while they were the workers in the camps or on the haciendas, it was Mayan that they were learning. And my grandfather spoke Mayan, which is how he met my mother. So on the ship, there were not a lot of women. There was a shortage of women. And then, you guys know Billy Yoon, and his grandfather came and took one of the Mexican Korean women. So the shortage just kind of kept happening.
There was more than just Billy.
I know. And I need to find those people too, because I'm sure that they also, Billy didn't really know his grandmother's story either until he and I talked. But so because of the shortage, even though Koreans were trying to marry Koreans and they had these arranged marriages, it really wasn't possible. So in 1992, they refer it as to a law, but I really don't think it could have been a written law. I think it was just a cultural thing. They gave permission for the men to marry Mayans. So a lot of them did. So we're not as unusual as people might think. And my grandfather and his brother both married Mayan women that were cousins.
Oh, cool.
That's the first I've heard that the Koreans learned Mayan first. And Korean, the other language that I think it's a Uraltic stock, like there's language stocks in the early people. I learned this in anthropology. And the other language that Korean's really similar to is Turkish.
I heard that too.
Yeah. So it's interesting. There may be some connection that way too. But here's I've been meaning to scan this and But this is, I'm gonna get my glasses. This is a reunion of 8 people. And it's a family who came from Mexico, but they came from, let's see, I think they came from Sonora. Is that northern? That's farther, that's closer to the border here, right?
I think kind of more in between, but not, I mean, Yucatan is at the southernmost tip.
Yeah, yeah. But, you know, I remember some growing up with some of these people, but this is their, I don't know if you can see it, but let's see. That's the Kim, they're Kims. But I'll scan this, but it's really well put together because each one does an interview, you know, and so it's like they're all the family. And so yeah, this guy was born in Sonora, Mexico, December 9th, 1917. But these people came from Merida, you know, so they're, you never know, you might be connected to some, but they're all here in California, or their descendants are here. A lot of these people, these are like my, I think these are Uncle Ralph's and my mom's age people, you know.
Ah, okay.
You know, so it would be your 4th generation?
That's always an interesting question. I'm 4th only because my great-grandparents were the immigrants. So immigration-wise, I'm 4th. My grandfather, they were first. My grandfather,
yeah.
right? But Korean, my grandfather was 100%. So in my family, we always have this discussion about, I'm in the 3rd line, right? But I'm actually technically 4th by what you count. But then when we talk about American, it gets messed up again. So I don't know. I'm Korean.
Oh, it doesn't make sense, you know, because when my mom used to give speeches, you know, she was 1st generation, quote unquote. But, you know, like when you have a kid that, you know, was born 10 years ago and he's 1st generation, there's no link, you know, there's no commonality between those two other than they have Korean blood in them somewhere. So it's really hard to, and the 1.5 thing is really a
Marketing term?
pretty much, yeah. That was done by Korean American Coalition, Charles Kim. He says he's responsible for it, so it figures. But the other thing that I'm working on now, and people are not liking this, which is nothing surprising, is my feeling is that the South Korean immigrants who created the Centennial Korean American Day in Hawaii did not want to be associated with the term slave. So they always referred to as the first Koreans as immigrants. But technically that's wrong because those Koreans never intended to stay. They intended to make money and go home. But when the independence movement started after the annexation, they couldn't go. So things changed. So I was looking at Mexico, and I think the South Korean scholars and the recent South Korean business people don't want to be associated with Incas or Mayans. And so they're not using the term slave either. The term for people who are sold to a hacienda as laborers under false pretenses, I don't know what you could relabel them as, but I'm going back to the people who came to America after 65, 70. And those people are way different than the pioneer generations because we're solid one country Korean attitude, you know. And when those people got here, they didn't like us. We spoke English, we were born here, the independence movement was over. They didn't need us. They didn't need the Korean National Association anymore. They didn't need the United Korean Committee or any of the people that were connected to it, and especially the descendants, because we were all so Americanized. And so they started the Hanenhae, which is the Korean Federation. And from that point on, you know, people like Robbie and Billy, you know, they're more involved because they grew up down there. I didn't. But, you know, there's a real division between the pioneer Korean generation and the next big wave of Koreans that came in the later years. But, and the pioneer and the South Korean immigrants also tried to attach themselves to the pioneers, and the South Korean educators and scholars try to use them like monkeys at a zoo or a archaeological exhibit because they don't have any connection. You know, that you know, one big thing about Korean culture is you build constituency. Like in the old days on a business card, it had what high school you went to, what college you went to, other things, because you were trying to establish who was better than who in this. And I mean, this is ridiculous. My business card, you know, had my name, my phone number, and maybe my email. You know, it's not, you know, I didn't want to be giving away all this, but I wasn't concerned about status. I accepted people for who they were, what they did on the merit of their own vibes. So there's this whole almost interference and revision of what the story is. So Diann, what you're doing and what you've found out, as little as you may think it is important. And I think the fact that you told me that, and did you get it from Bowles about the Koreans learning Mayan first?
No, we knew that from our family history and several families that we knew that they're really, we knew that they spoke Mayan.
Oh, that's great. Because that just, you know, it's stuff like that. Has any Koreans ever reported that? Do you know?
You know, the Korean-Mayan story is missing, but I mean, you hit on so many topics. I'm still going back to 1917 Sonora, right? So like, yeah. So let me catch up a little. The slave term is interesting. I guess indentured servant would be, I don't know, a nicer way to say it.
Well, but it's a denial thing, you know.
I don't understand how anyone can deny it when it's in every document. The second the Koreans step foot in Merida, there's letters being written by the Koreans, by Chinese workers that were concerned, by the Koreans in America that were concerned, and everyone is using the term slave. So I don't really feel like that's something, other than the fact that, again, and you talk so much about the importance of education, I think the image is you're kidnapped from your country, you know, you're brought over, and maybe they just don't understand what the term truly means. I'm not.
Oh, no, the slavery existed in Korea until 1930. The Japanese stopped it. There's a chapter in Homer Holbert's book that, I mean, and women were sold into slavery. You know, it's the stepping stones to the comfort women. You know, one of my grandfather's things was that Koreans do not want to take the blame themselves for what they do. You know, and so that's where a lot of this revisionist stuff is. But Koreans are so concerned. That was one of my grandfather's big issues too, was that, you know, the caste system. You know, you're down in the bottom, and I think that's what the term "love yourself, love others," you know, was one of his saying, is because in Korea, and a lot of people are agreeing with this, in Korean culture, you're taught to hate yourself. You're taught that you'll never be good enough, and you know, and they have this term called Han. Have you heard the term called Han?
Yeah.
You know, I don't like that. You know, because to me, it's this excuse. You know, it's like, you know, we're not going to deal with this because this is Han. You know, this is part of our tradition. My grandfather didn't like it. He goes, you know, it's like having a monkey on your back that you're not going to get rid of. You know, so it's so there's all these things that are involved. But, you know, when you start adding stuff to the truth of the story, what it does for me is, I've been attacking the Hawaiian immigration for 20 years. You know, it's things like that I find out that just go, well, how do you deal with this? You know, this is another, you know, instance. But the other thing is when you went there, did you meet the various groups of people that were involved with trying to preserve because I've seen a few different groups over the years, And lately, the activity of the South Korean government giving pension money and recognition like they did here, which some of those people deserve, you know, because some of the ancestors of that pioneer generation gave a lot of money to the independence movement, you know, and were true dedicated patriots to save the country. But what was your involvement with those people, if you had any?
So the first time we really, again, you know, didn't know anything. So we decided to go back when the museum was done. And also at that point, I had connected with various people that were involved in centennial celebrations and are heads of descendant groups in Mexico. So I did meet a lot of people the second time around. But it was, I went for two reasons. The main one was to get stories of my family, because I thought that they would still know that, to see the museum, what else was in there, and also to just gather more information about the historical context of the story. You've been the one that's given me the most historical context of anyone that I've come across. So it was a little disappointing, to be honest.
Yeah.
Nobody knew or wouldn't tell me about, like, it's a very strange, I don't even know how to explain it, because I'm kind of new to all this. You know, I didn't come away with what I had hoped. So I came back to continue, you know, reading the stuff you give me, looking through archives, trying to come up with my own conclusions. You know, and Han, I think, is a nice sentiment, but I don't think you can get there without going through the truth. So if you shortcut to get that, like, sure, harmony and everybody getting, it's the good parts, right? But you have to walk through the truth to get there, or it's all false.
No, that's right. And the other thing, like with me, I think I was talking to Han about it last night. There's nobody from my pioneer generation that does what I do. Maybe Billy a little bit, and the other people. But now, I mean, what you're doing as a descendant of that group down there, you know, because all of the history is common. You know, it's just in a different place, because the first letter that came out of Mexico from the ginseng merchant in 1905 about the bad condition went to my grandfather, you know, and so, and it's not because he's my grandfather, it's because he's that physical person that occupied the space of president of this group and this movement. And so his basic connection, up until one of the letters actually that you sent me, till the day he died, involved the Koreans who went to Merida. So that one, I was talking to somebody else. I think I was talking to the Canadian Korean. Her name is, I should just call her name. Her name is Kyung-Soo Min. But so I said, yeah, you know, this one scholar, you know, who claims that he knows so much. Somehow on Facebook, I got a copy of this list of money being donated, and they're going, what is this? And then they're trying to link money to this Gwangju communist thing. And I'm just going, oh, this is this leftist South Korean government scholar BS. What it was the list of donations from the Koreans in the KNA Mexico for my grandfather's Death Day memorial service in Los Angeles. So I'm going, okay, this, you know, these scholars, oh yeah, I know about Tosan and this, that, and the other. So I go, well, maybe, you know, he died on March 10th, 1938. And this is like, and it says memorial in it. And I mean, I know enough Korean to figure out what the hell it says. And I'm just going, what a dumbass, you know, what a fake, you know? So, you know, I don't know, you know, I got a lot of joy out of that. You know?
Diann, how did you first hear about Tosan? Was it through Flip, or was it through prior research on your own, or?
No, it was the museum. So, you know, the museum is closed for remodel. Everything's torn down except Tosan's picture, you know, and she's saying, yeah, for sure. and the Korean flag, sorry, Tosan and the Korean flag. And so, you know, she tells me about him and this, you know, famous Korean hero, and that's when I started my research. So I read everything that I could about him. And then Flip's photo gallery has a photo of Tosan in Mexico.
Right.
So I reached out to him just to say, hey, do you have any more information about Tosan and this photo and who's in it? And then he responded back, you know, I'm Tosan's grandson. And I told you, right?
Yeah.
I was bringing my son home from Little League, and we're in 7-Eleven, and I see what Flip is writing me. And I think the phone flew out of my hand. I had no idea, right? Because you're kind of famous. And then that's where we started from. And so he has sent me a lot of academic papers, you know, on him. And I asked lots of questions, and he's very generous with that time. But going back to the letters, there were also letters from the governments of Korea and Mexico, you know, and Korea expressing, we heard that our people are being denied, you know, living conditions. We hear our people are being treated, and it says slaves, which is so, it used the word esclavos. So again, it's confusing why there's still a debate. And then Mexico responds, everything's great. Everything's fine. You know, we have medical care. It's all cool. And then they're asked, the haciendados are asked to report on the Koreans. And so, like, it seems like every hacienda operated differently. And so then they wrote these, and there are these documents, and Rachel gave them to me. Rachel Lim is a Berkeley PhD candidate who's just fabulous. And it had, you know, kind of how they get paid, how they're treated, you know, and everyone was a little different. So that's a little part of it too. Like, maybe some haciendados were better than the others because we have that group that that organized themselves to negotiate the release of their contract if they could pay themselves out of it. And there were about 4 haciendas that allowed that, but not a lot of people could afford to do that because obviously the wages were terrible and the conditions were terrible too.
That was from the Korean-Mayan-English in San Francisco, because they did the same thing for the Koreans coming from Hawaii to get them off the plantations, because they had somehow, you know, there was contract labor laws that you couldn't bring paid laborer into the United States. And so they set up somehow with this bank in Korea that they gave a loan to these people for their passage, their on getting on board the ship to get to Hawaii and some other stuff. And so the Korean-Mayan-English, which later became the Korean National Association, would guarantee that if those people wanted to leave, they would pay. And so I think they did the same thing for the Koreans, if they could, in Mexico. But I don't think that worked out too well, because I think about the time that things were getting established, the war broke out in Mexico.
Not established. We had the contracts expired in 1909.
Yeah.
And then, you know, like good haciendados, a lot of them would actually charge the Koreans for berths, clothes.
Yeah, I saw it. I couldn't believe it.
So the contract got extended for another year. So they actually didn't complete their contract until 1910. And in 1910, the Mexican Revolution does break out, but it doesn't reach Yucatan until about 1914. So they had some time there. And the organization sending money, that's very interesting, because there's a professor that wrote a book in Mexico that has my family arriving in Motul in 1908, which means they would have had to have purchased their freedom. There's no way they could have worked that themselves. They had 3 small children that couldn't work. So there was a story down in Merida about, you know, because they were, well, all the Mexican descendants claim that they're related to the royal family or some noble class, which we know is true. But there were
There's some.
yes,
Not,
everybody, not me, but everybody else. And so there were stories that they had never done physical labor, and if you didn't meet your quota, you would be beaten. And they felt very strongly to protect each other. So they would work extra and give to the people that couldn't meet their quotas. So the only way my family could have bought their freedom is the organization sent them the money, which would be amazing because there should be a record of that somewhere. Or, you know, there was a big group of soldiers that came with them. So single men, you know, that it was probably heartbreaking to see these small children. And my great grandmother had 3 of them. The youngest was 6 months when she arrived in Mexico, to get them out of there, right? And that's a great story that you didn't want the children to suffer in the way that they would, because I mean they had to take the little ones out to the, I don't know where the children were at the time that they were working out in the campo, but you know, that couldn't have been easy for them.
oh no, I mean the conditions of Hennecken work is, and it's brutal. I mean, and the climate, just the climate difference for Koreans going to that part of the world is crazy. You know, it's but like some of the people that came to California from Hawaii were soldiers and basically unruly. I mean, they had to have their own police departments to deal with these people before the white, so to speak, police or the Hawaiian police would deal with them. I mean, here in Southern California, in the agriculture business and in Hawaii itself too. And 2 guys, Im Chung-gi and Yi Gong, were these, they call it like a Luna, but it's a term for a leader, a labor leader of the group. So these Koreans were put into groups. And they didn't go to haciendas, they went to plantations. So there's a little bit of difference, but it's real similar. And so when those guys left Hawaii and came here, they knew how to organize all the labor units and the citrus orchards and stuff. I was trying to find out if Rachel Lim is an M, if her Chinese characters are M, because sometimes that gets, somebody thought they were Kim and they just took off the K and made M, and the Chinese characters don't translate like that. But there's so much important details of both groups that went that support the other as far as the truth of that whole pioneer movement. You know, like my grandfather walked out of Mexico with 25 grand. And I mean, that's like, I think today that would be $300,000 or $400,000. And so I'm going, you know, did they wire the money? How did he get out? Plus he went to, on his tour of the other cities between 1917 and 1918, I read somewhere he was convincing women to melt their gold.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, so the importance of both, you know, our heritage to make this a more true story is the key thing. Did Han tell you his story about his heritage?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be for another time.
Well, just
you talk.
You know,
I just wanted to say really quick that's a really good point, because it mirror images Mexico. Not initially there, you know, it was a Japanese, Korean speaking translators that they had, because the Japanese had a more elevated status in Mexico since they were establishing themselves as a
business,
whatever.
And their position in the world because of beating Russia.
Right.
War. Their presence was big time. you know.
But then the Koreans themselves elevate themselves. So the foreman would be called a capataz, and very similar thing. And so I found a document of 1915 of my family returning, and it has the person who was in charge of them.
Wow.
And so, you know, there were people organizing the laborers and keeping them together. And in Mexico, you know, the revolution was part of it, but also other than Henneken, there was not a lot of industry in that area. So they spread to all over Mexico. Sonora, Mexico City.
Oh yeah,
It was crazy how they seemed to just kind of go to the winds of the world, like the four corners of Mexico. It was crazy.
That's what Koreans do. You know, somehow, some way, you know.
After Tosan comes, it seems like people start either to come back or start to organize in their areas and communicate more with each other. And all of that is
started that before he got there, because they had a Hungsadan, and the KNA was set up early. But also when Tosan was there, he was negotiating with the Mexican government to try to get people to be able to go to Cuba. And so the ones that went in 1921, that whole deal was started, you know, years before. And they thought that the work in the sugar plantations would be better than the work in the Henneken farms. That was one of the reasons. But then that whole, you know, Joseph Jun and his documentary, which opens up a great story. I mean, it's amazing. But
well, the Koreans that went to Cuba, the sugarcane was not what they had promised. I know, shocking. We were lied to again.
Yeah, so, that's the other part of it.
So they struggled to find things. Went back to Henneken, and then one of the families, you know, became jewelers, and that's the gold story. My mom tells that story too. They would come from Cuba just dripping in gold and buy gold from Mexico, take it back to Cuba, and were very successful jewelers and optometrists, which was kind of cool.
Oh, well, there was I don't know. I have it written down on the travel log, but when my grandfather got there, he needed glasses, and there was a guy. So this would be 1917. That man had created a ophthalmologist business, or he was making glasses, and he made my grandfather a pair of glasses while he was there.
Which didn't even really strike me until recently, that I'm looking at these photographs of, you know, these people in early 19, and they're wearing glasses. And it never thought to me like, well, they didn't just go down to the store, you know, and the Mexicans were like, hey, you want some? It was very industrious, you know, how they survived. And I think that's kind of why it's such a fascinating story to people that they survived the way that they did. But then also there's, I think, a misperception that I've heard of from South Korea, that we're all still struggling, starving, you know, very much the same as our ancestors who immigrated.
It's you know, the Koreans always have to elevate themselves somehow and cover up. You know, they're not going to go, well, the reasons the Koreans went there is because these guys gave the king money. So basically the king sold them, and they're, you know, they don't want to, I mean, people were writing it like that, and that's the truth. And, you know, it just, there's so much that I find the basic problem is, if they're not going to get the beginning of this story honest, why would they get the rest of it honest? As long as it benefits somebody's personal gain. It boils down to that. I mean, you know, like my grandfather was a service-oriented person, where like on the other opposite, Syngman Rhee was a power-hungry person. And so in Korean culture, you're really divided between, you know, who really understands serving the people, and who still wants to be the yangban, the high class, or the king, you know, and it's unfortunate, but for some reason, now a lot of young people, I mean, like, you know, Rachel's age and this other Kyung Soo Min, are frustrated, I think, with what they're having to go through to find the truth. Han was the same way, but Han was, you know, there weren't that many, but now there's becoming more people at serious, if this makes sense, it's too serious of a word, but at a certain level that maybe I should say sincere. You know, they really have a sincere care to get to the bottom of things and, you know, fix what's gone on. Because I'm sure Rachel thinks I'm just absolutely nuts, because a lot of stuff that she's probably learned from respected people, I'm going to say is BS.
Rachel doesn't think you're nuts. She thinks you're quite brilliant. But you know, sometimes you're a little too honest, maybe. No, I'm just kidding. No, you're
You know, it doesn't change. You know?
you're good. She's never said a bad thing. That was me putting words in her mouth.
Oh no, I don't take it as bad things. I mean, if
he
someone thought I
doesn't.
was nuts, I mean, it's almost
No.
a compliment. No, I'm not saying I don't have any negative issues or anything at all. It's just, you know, like sometimes people will, like when we went to Atlanta, and Han and I went to Atlanta, and I was speaking at the national convention. The first thing I asked the people that invited me, "Are you sure you really want me to come there?" And yeah, you know, and so, you know, so it's just, you know, but I don't have any hang up about what I say. Maybe my delivery is not the best, but you know, I know what I know, and I believe what I know and have learned and tell people is the truth. And you know, it's like pretty much what I told somebody 2 years ago is going to be the same thing what I tell them tomorrow. You know, I didn't even worry about it. But you know, I've challenged every person in every Korean Studies Institute to a debate about how screwed up they are, and they won't
Well,
take.
I think the other part too is that my work wasn't possible, you know, 5 years ago. Everything has been scanned, is digitized. I mean, I probably did cry when I found my great grandfather's death certificate.
Well, you should. I mean, that's what it's about. I mean, and that's the real emotion of heritage. You know, I mean, that's you. You found you. You know what I
Right,
mean?
but I think you couldn't, like, I'm looking at the original documents in the USC archive. You know what I mean? I don't know how possible this was before, that so many people are looking at the actual things.
Those,
And
you know how messed up that is? I got those people, me and two other friends of mine got USC the first big fund to digitize those things. This was 15, 16 years ago. A lot of that stuff has been sitting at USC, and then they just stole a bunch of more stuff. It's you're absolutely right. You're benefiting from this. And the reason I brought this up is because so many people have given so much money to USC and so much material, and they haven't done a damn thing. The Korean Overseas Korean Foundation, or it's like who's is it the guy that had the term from Tizard?
Yeah,
Is it
David Tizard.
David Tizard said, I think he was the one that wrote a paper, and he says, you know, having the South Korean government control Korean studies outside of Korea is the reason Korean studies are like having an intellectual blight. You know, so it's paid to play, and that's where it's not the Korean people or other people that aren't willing to accept the description as slaves or that the negative part. It's the people in between that want to elevate themselves and then elevate Korea to get more money or more prestige or something. You know, they're not just interested in saying, hey, guess what I learned? You know, this is this, let's put this together and let's make this a true story, unless there's some, you know, return on investment or reward or brownie points or something. It's just ridiculous. And so, you know, for you to accomplish what you've accomplished is, you know, the Korean studies online and what you can learn and what you can and who you can connect to is now becoming different. I mean, Han and I have been pushing along this path, and you know, it's good that you're here because you're proof of what we've been, you know, trying to push and you know, shove down people's throats makes a difference.
Diann, I had a question in regards to what traditions did your grandfather keep that he learned from his father from Korea? And then are you still practicing those traditions, like Korean traditions?
I'm still a baby Korean, so I'm still learning the Korean culture part of it. The main thing for us was the food.
Uh-huh.
And the incorporation or the we were, you know, the fusion people because the ingredients weren't the same. Um,
Yeah.
our assimilation, I don't think was really by choice. It was by survival. And so, you know, he was Korean, but he was in Mexico for most of his life and then ended up here in the US. So, you know, and being a cultural person, it's hard to nitpick, you know, what's Korean and what's not. But you know, from my grandfather, he was always honest and kind and gentle, and you know, family was everything for him. And being of service to people, you know, was important also. But as far as traditions, and we didn't have Mayan ones either, which is, you know, really interesting. It was my grandmother went to my grandfather's father when she was 16. So I don't know that I've identified specific traditions, but in speaking and getting to know more Korean people and then connecting more with my community, and there are a lot of us here in San Diego, a lot of descendants here in San Diego, that are all kind of finding each other. And so I know Flip has you've been at this for such a long time, and, you know, but people seem to be coming out of the woodwork now, you know, with good intentions that are seeking the truth. So I think the groundwork that Tosan set, the work that you've done, Flip, I think they're coming. I hope they're coming.
No, I think they are. I mean, I think in a lot it's also the, you know, like the rest of, you know, society now, everybody is searching for the truth, you know, and it's just, you know, it's like my grandparents were the first married couple to come in 1902, you know. However we ended up in the valley, you know, my grandmother was here, you know, she brought the rest of the story here. I drive from my house to my sister's house. I drive by 2 markets I used to go to with my grandmother when we were kids. And, you know, so everything else I've done in between, I still have this steady chronology of what our family history is, where a lot of other people don't, you know. And now you can trace yours, you know, from Mexico through whatever, you know, and you're finding all those pieces of the puzzle. And I think, you know, also ancestry.com, what is it, 23? I mean, all these things that are helping people, like, you know, okay, you know, you're Mayan, you know, so then all of a sudden, well, gosh, you know, I have this way to, you know, nobody can question that. Like, I know I'm Irish and Korean. I mean, I don't, you know, have any doubt about it. My sister went and did the ancestry thing, and she said, well, you know, we got some Japanese blood in us. But, you know, to me, that's the failure, you know, from my anthropology and my biomed stuff, is the failure of the sampling, because population came to Japan. It didn't come from Japan to the continent of Asia, you know. So you know, so now, you know, there's no there's less doubting, you know. And so when people are on an identity search, they have a couple things that they can hold on to with proof, where before it's just like, are you sure? You know, am I adopted?
I mean, you know, and that makes me mad on all kinds of levels. You're totally right on the technology, because my heritage doesn't have a Korean subset. So it does list, I mean, I'm more Mongol than anything else, but it has Japanese, Chinese. I mean, that's how it defines Korean, which is, you know.
The other thing about the Korean blood too is the homogeneous blood sampling is BS.
Right.
You know, if you have Mongol blood, that means most likely you've got some more Northern Korean. There's blood types that are in the south of Korea that actually have Polynesian strains of blood. You know, so, you know, this whole, I mean, I had my degree in anthropology before I spent a lot of time in Korea, and not only am I not buying it because of what I grew up with, my anthropological training is telling me like, you are full of baloney, dude. You know.
But Ancestry's done a pretty decent job of creating the Korean subset. And so now it's when you do the DNA over there, it says Korean, and it tries to narrow, like it's all evolving, right? So it's all kind of crap by now. But I think the part that's so messed up for me is I've never pretended to be something I'm not. And so to have allowed so many people to tell me that this is not my story, and let's say, for sake of argument, that my DNA didn't prove it, does that take my people away from me? Like, are my grandparents not my grandparents anymore? It really is a topic, you know. But now there's so many more multicultural people that, you know, I don't know. I still get like, what? But the Mayans are extinct, and oh no, they're not.
Yeah. Well, that was the reaction I got from the two women. They were like, wait a minute. You know, there's Mayan people still. You know, it's not. What was that movie, Apocalypto? You know?
No! Don't wait a minute. Say that out loud ever.
Let me finish, because that's how gullible people are. You know, and that's what I don't like about a lot of things with technology, because it gives people the, you know, it's like, you know what movie I really don't like you don't like that one? Parasite.
Uh-oh.
Because Parasite shows how stupid non-Koreans are. Why would you award the truth of the worst part of Korean society thinking it was a good movie? It was made well. They got technical awards. They didn't get any awards on content, you know? And I've been in basements like those people lived in. I've been in those alleys. You know, a lot of people that I talked to that were not Korean or didn't thought it was like a comedy. You know, I go, this is a reflection of what's real. And like, even to me, when the floods came, which I've been there for floods in the 90s, like 100-year flood, and a lot of people died.
Well, they're going through flooding right now in Korea.
Yeah, again, you know, and then when those people were in the basement of where they lived and they're trying to get the cigarettes, to me that was like some kind of homage to the Sewol Ho, to people drowning in the boat, you know. So, you know, if you didn't get that part of it, you know, you know, it was made well, don't get me wrong, but it gave non-Korean people the wrong message, is what I'm, you know. So, you know, Apocalypto did too. You know, it's.
Well, I'm not speaking that word because what is so, I mean, when you talk about messing up history, like that film, and to use our language, because he used the Yucatec Mayan language, that's our dialect, was just so, I mean, there are no words. And to take the history and compress it, and to take things from more Aztec culture than mine, like, you don't even, it's just the whole thing, like. And if you talk about it when you're in Yucatan, like, it never, that's just, I mean, you're just sitting there basically yelling at how much you hate that movie and Mel Gibson, because it was so completely irresponsible. And you know, and to put our language and our culture, or even that imagery out there so irresponsibly, is just, I mean, I hope I never run into that guy, because
he's not, he's a messed up individual. He just has a lot of money and pull. But that's, you know, it's propaganda. You know, it's propaganda that made him a lot of money.
It wasn't even I mean, there was nothing. It was just, I don't even know what the word to use. I mean, it was such a stupid, the plot was horrible. It didn't even make sense. And then to have the Spaniards come at the end, like, that doesn't even happen for another 300, like, the whole thing propaganda. We got to change topics, because I'm just gonna.
Okay.
Sorry, I just can't.
No, that's fine. I mean, that's every right that you have. That's what I do when people say certain things about stuff in Korea. Just, you know, you know. But you know, that's good. You know, you have to be passionate about stuff like that, or stuff doesn't change. You know, right on.
Right. You gotta be, yeah. Gotta be passionate.
So what's the next step of your plans? Are you gonna, when COVID is over, are you going back down there, or?
I'm gonna come visit you, and Han and I are gonna take all your books that you threatened to burn. No.
Yeah, I canceled every arrangement I had with every entity about this stuff. I canceled them all. I don't know what I'm gonna do. It's something's got to be done quick, but it has to be the right thing. There's so much information here, it's crazy. It's just, but I don't trust anybody. What I've been through, and I mean, we gave the largest collection that Korea's ever gotten of documents, my grandmother's collection, and they messed that up. And the Huntington Research Library, they only wanted what they wanted, and they don't have a Korean scholar there. I don't know how they're going to figure this stuff out. I don't trust USC one bit, with the stuff we gave them from my uncle. So, and I don't trust the Independence Hall anymore. So I have to find somehow or some way or something. But, the other thing too is, I have a nephew and a niece, and my sister said just leave it up to them. But that's dangerous.
But honestly, my real answer is, as soon as it's over, we're ready. I'm ready to go to Korea, and I'm ready to.
Did you find out where your hometown was?
Yes. So it's Kyrgyz in.
Oh, that's right.
In Busan. And I'm butchering. I'm trying to learn Korean. I swear. I have a lot on my plate right now.
Yeah.
But it kills me that I don't even know the correct pronunciations. That seems lame to me. But so yeah, we're gonna go look for our family registry to see, with all the 5,000 variations of my grandfather's names and his children's names, if we can find that, because that's important to me to.
Do you have his name in Chinese characters?
If it's the correct one on the manifest, we do. And then we're just hoping that there'll be somebody there that can, try to help us with the names, or know the Chinese characters themselves, or maybe I'll ask Rachel to write them for me before we go.
Why doesn't Rachel go with you?
Rachel's busy, but I mean, I would love to drag her along. My second cousin, once removed, married a Korean, and she needs to take her son to register in his family registry. So we have some cousins that have been working on this with me, that we're ready to go as soon as we can, to go down, not only to do that, but to see all the museums that are there, to see that information, just to be there, because no one from my grandfather has gone back. So to bring it full circle for me is.
So you would go to Busan first and then branch out from there to find.
We have to start wherever her family is, which is outside of Seoul. So we have to start.
Oh, okay.
And then work our way down to, Incheon, and then get down to Busan, and then come back. So, I don't know how much there. I'm kind of a nerd, so I may be doing some of this on my own. If I could get Rachel to go with me, that'd be great. But yeah, we're committed to go see what we can see over there. And I'm ready to go see it, to see what I've been reading about and learning about, and just to know that my grandfather, made it back.
Well, when you get ready, really ready to go on that trip, let me know. I'm probably gonna find somebody over there that'll be interested in learning what you know and helping you out down there in Busan.
Well, we just need COVID to be done, because I can't be quarantined for 14 days and then do my little, adventure.
Well, I think, I mean, it's bad, it's got to get better, but, I mean, you would just have to have it get better here, because Korea, they're going to quarantine you. But if, like, Hawaii is going to do, you get tested here and you isolate for 72 hours, then you get tested again, and then you get on the plane and you can just deplane. You don't have to go to quarantine.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's down the line. They were going to do that August 1st, but then California in the United States just took off like crazy, and so they go, no way. So they extended it more, but I think Korea will be the same way. But no, that'd be great. Oh, and the other thing is absolutely you got to come up here, and see what's here.
Yeah, it's like it is a American Korean museum for sure. Going up
Yeah,
there.
and there's some. Oh yeah, I guess I should go look in these letters. Because I got the letters from my grandfather from Mexico to my grandmother. Copies. The originals are in Korea, which, that's the other thing is, this story of my grandfather in Mexico is in Korea in detail, and it hasn't really been all put together.
When you start looking at that, can you do me a favor and look for a letter that would have been written in March, towards the end of the month or after March 17th? Because I think he was at a wedding of my great aunt.
March 17th,
1918.
1918.
Yeah. And so, like, I think you and I have spoken.
Well, the other thing too is on that chronology of where he was. I think I put it the dates of kind of the areas that he was in. He
was in Merida at that span, so it doesn't make sense if he was there that he wouldn't have attended. But there.
Oh, if he was there and there was some, I mean, he'd probably been at every wedding possible.
Right, but I like the idea that my great grandfather and your grandfather crossed paths or even interacted at all is huge for me. But to have a date.
Yeah.
The same place, that might elevate me to the noble status.
Well, the thing is part of that
Korean Disney princess. Flip, make her the Korean Disney princess. Come on, Flip, you can do it.
I'm the Korean multicultural. I'm sure there's lots of more living Korean women out there than me. And that was a joke, Han.
Sorry, I read it. Sorry.
And I told this too. It's a funny thing, that girl that came from nothing, that didn't know anything, to find this treasure of a lineage and a history that I'm so grateful to be a part of. I mean, kind of feeling like I didn't know anything. I didn't know that I could find anything to find what I had.
Oh no, when I first talked to you, it was like I'm on this like wild, needle in a haystack chase. You had certain bit of a pathway opened up, and then things just fell in place. It was amazing to watch all the cards fall on the table. And then finally you just, wow, she's done it. She's on the way to. I mean, you'll just find out more, which is, it's like with Han. Han brings his picture. He goes, "You know anybody in this picture?" I go, "Yeah, I know that guy, that guy." And they're my grandfather. This, and it just, he went, "Why did my parents hide this from me?" So it was funny. But Han, all those guys that were in Merida who went to the Mexican Revolution were Pak Yong Man's people.
Oh wow! Okay.
He had a military academy down there
in Mexico. Oh
yeah. Han was testing me at my mom's memorial service. He's going, "Well, can I ask this guy a question to see if he really knows his stuff?"
And it proved me a little bit, didn't it?
I knew I answered it properly.
Right.
So the question about the Koreans in the Mexican Revolution is, what side were they on? Because that was not very clear. And the Mexican government, there are some allegations that they hired the soldiers, to fight on their side.
The Korean soldiers?
The Korean soldiers.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think they were mercenaries.
They certainly were mercenaries, and the part that they go to Guatemala was documented, but then there's also, allegation that they were on the revolutionary side, because that's what they were fighting for, the liberation of the worker against the exploitation of the government. And
put it this way, I wouldn't be surprised if they were on both sides.
Both sides? Yeah.
That's probably what happened. I don't have any evidence of that.
God, where was I reading? I'll have to dig it up. I found a pretty good source on that. And I don't think I sent it. That's the other thing, is somebody's got to grab my hard drives and copy them. you know, for whatever embarrassing stuff is on there or not.
Don't worry, I'll do that.
There's so many papers that I've downloaded over the years. There's a library there. There's literally thousands of papers, you know, PDF files, files I've got from seminars that nobody else has, and things that I've written that, you know, so Han, you know, has captured a lot of my hallucinations or whatever.
Oral history. Yeah.
He can put it into, what is it? Is it Nifty? Is there a program that translates text? There's Dragon.
Yeah, the speaking program.
Yeah, there's another program that a friend of mine that's writing a book. I went to high school with him, but he's mentioned another program.
Okay.
He's an interesting, I went to high school with him. He is studying the influence of the political situation on the Gaza Strip on young people. And he's traced this, the lives of some high school revolutionaries from their high school days until I think now they're 43. And so he's writing this book, and he says, "What do you think of this?" And I go, "I think it's a great story, but your writing sucks." And so I edited it, and like, here's an example. You know, he was talking about a group of Israeli soldiers going after these Palestinians. And he said, the captain of the squadron, and a squadron is Air Force. A squad is Army for people, you know. And so it didn't make any sense if you knew what so stuff like that. He goes, oh shit, you know. And so, you know, there's certain things like that. And then people, when they're writing, really screw up. I mean, I learned, because I'm really bad at it, but I always really hard on myself correcting, is the use of but and. You know, like, people will write and make a run-on sentence with and, or they'll use the word but as a timekeeper, instead of realizing what they're doing is comparing what they said on this side of but to the other side, the ending, which is the more emphasis. So if you're not intending to change the perspective, you know, I mean, it just, anybody that can read is just like, you know, so anyway, oh, whatever. But you know what's really funny is these guys are after Tosan's philosophy of seeking the truth, you know, and education. You know, and you know, with what we're mixing with, you know, the Merida group and the whole, I mean, it comes out more and more, you know, how important the truth and education is.
Right.
I mean, it's just, you know, it can't be any more true than what's in the White House. You know, it's such a crazy time, you know.
All right, before we get to that, should we end it here?
It's just two more points.
Diann, this is great.
Yeah, Diann, two more,
Two
of
more
course.
points, since
Sure.
we probably never.
But, no, we want you to come back.
Stop it.
Yeah, update on your journey. Yeah.
Thank you, Flip. You have been overly complimentary about what I've accomplished, because I feel like I'm just getting started. But
you are. I mean, you're gonna, you know, I hate to tell you this, but you're gonna be doing this the rest of your life.
Awesome.
You know, because you're on the path. You know, why at one point, even when you find more and more out, you know, you're gonna want to have this story respected, you know, by your kids, by other people, by all of the descendants. I mean, it's almost a burden. Well, it is a burden, but it's almost a curse. But you're good at it.
I certainly have felt both cursed and burden, but I mean, the big motivator that I didn't talk about is that my grandfather is very much omitted from the narrative or the work that has been done. And so for me, that has been, you know, his name was Samuel Lias Perez. His Korean name was Lee Kwang-sik. And the centennial celebrations and everything that has been done and documented, he and his brother, Jose Lias Perez, are are not in these stories, are not in this narrative. And so, you know, and you've touched on it before, you know, there are the people, there's Sigmund Rhee, and then there's Tosan. And I think we were more on the Tosan side with being humble and not demanding the spotlight. So it's not surprising that we were.
Well, that's you know, I'll help you find that out if I can. You know, that's
it was
that's interesting.
I mean, you know, I try to be more forgiving with just the lack of technology. I mean, I didn't move to China. We moved to San Diego, which is right next to Tijuana, and there's a large Korean community that was there. So that's kind of my big motivator, is to honor my grandfather. And then also, I just want to point out, Flip, that all the really rad people that are coming up down this path are women. Sorry, hon, but they're women.
I'm
We're excited, right? Because we're all cute, but
No, it's kind of been like that. You know, my uncles didn't do what my mom did.
Right, but I don't think the women have been given their place, and it's been painfully missing for me in this story, right? That I can't find my great grandmother's Korean name. Like, she wasn't referred to as the wife of, and you know, yes,
well, you know, you're not going to like that, but you're going to forge through it because you're who you are, and you're on the other side. But in Korean culture, you didn't call your wife by her name. You called her Uri Chip Saddam. Uri is our, Chip is house, and Saddam is person. You referred to your mother basically as a servant of the house. You know, it's that's how messed up early culture is. And you know, unfortunately, male chauvinism in South Korea amongst most males today is still prevalent. You know, it's so you're gonna, you know, but it you know, it's like Carolyn and Sarah Park, they were the ones that were in charge of the Atlanta thing. You know, it's you know, and I'll tell you what, the men, well, there's some pretty disgusting women scholars, but the ones I have the biggest beefs with are the men, you know. And you know, I used to try to be more forgiving, as you use the term, but right now at my age and what's going on, it's like, you know, no. I'm the opposite of no. But you know, to people like you and people like Rachel and these people I met the other day, I mean, there's a growing group of people that you know, I'm grateful that are there. You know, and unfortunately, well, it's like, even with me, I mean, I grew up with my mom, my grandmother, my sister is a successful woman. My grandfather started the first, you know, kind of rights for women. And so I have no issue with that. I don't know, Han might, but I don't think so.
Wow.
But that's just a joke. Even in surfing,
I have no issues with women.
Han would love to have an all-women Pungmo group, you know. But you know, even in surfing, I ran the first women's longboard professional tour for 3 years.
Yeah, I don't think, you know, and your mom is a wonderful example. It's not that they I don't think they've been given credit for what they've done, or you know, that their story certainly has not been told in this narrative. And I think that the more that women, you know, take the spotlight, as uncomfortable as they are with it, you know, I think they kind of need to give space or get out of the way, because I certainly feel like a lot of work needs to still be done.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, if you're not going to have the answers for me, then, you know, I'm going to go do what I can to figure it out myself. So I've been excited.
Well, that's seeking the truth. You know, I mean, you're following Tosan's philosophy, you know, and you're
here.
and you have the other one, you have the courage to do it, and, you know, you're loyal to your family. I mean, you're hitting all the cylinders. You know, and it's not because it's his terms, it's because, you know, that's kind of the way things should work. you know, and that's, um, you know, like women. I mean, did I send you the thing he wrote about women, about, you know, counseling this guy in 1927? It was from a book. I'll send it to you. It'll blow your mind. And that's the other thing why, you know, I'm so disappointed in Koreans and Korean men in society, is because, you know, this was a thing that was pushed, you know, and my grandfather died for this stuff, you know, and but now the young women in Korea are really, you know, with Hell Chosun and their future being so bleak, you know, they really need women to be scholars and women to find role models for them. And that's what Kyung Soo Min and Kelly Lon are doing with the book they're writing. You know, they're encouraging. I mean, they feel the same way. You know, the story needs to be told, and, you know, we're women and we're going to do it, and whoever's in our way, you know. So, yeah, no, I think it's great. You know, and I think it's, and I also think it's great that your kids are seeing you put this together, you know, because it's their heritage as well, you know, and, you know, and their identity, you know, the more solid, that's a lot of big problem with identity. And not that you're wearing it on your sleeve, but just, you know, when you come to certain times in life where, you know, your identity inside and what's true to you is solid, it helps you deal with other problems, you know. So
well, I think, you know, having the aging parents and losing the parents and finding a way to hold on, because I can't ask these questions of my grandfather, and I wish I could have, you know, and part of it was generational. Part of it is the story is sad and painful. So a lot of people don't want to talk about it. But, you know, you wish you would have, I wish I would have known what I know now when I was younger and had access to these people. Because, you know, your parents aren't cool, nothing's cool, you don't want to talk to anybody, you do your own thing. And now my mom, you know, some of the stuff that she is saying, I'm not sure happened.
well, I understand, yeah. But what you have to do is you still have to kind of make note of those things, because somewhere along the line, something may verify what she said and it'll be important. Other things won't. I mean, I've, you know, my dad had serious Alzheimer's. I've taken care of 3 other people. My dad's sister had it. And, you know, it's unfortunate of what happens, but, you know, like, even when my dad, every now and then something would be clear as day, you know, and it would make sense, you know, just out of the book, holy crap, you know. But no, it's no, it's good. You know, I think we should get on with Rachel on a Zoom.
Okay.
Up for it, you know.
I'll send me your email.
Because I'm interested, you know, because I've lectured at Berkeley for years. I'm interested to see if she's different than, you know, I've met some great people there, but I've also met some people that are part of this revisionist, you know, like Ed Chong, you know, he's at Berkeley, but he's generations ago. And the last time I lectured at Berkeley, all the young students were really upset that their Korean studies program wasn't better, you know, because they're one of the originals, you know. And there's one guy up there named Lou Lancaster who's a Buddhist specialist. I respect that guy more than many scholars I've ever met. And he was friends with one of my professors at UCSB that I studied Buddhism under, and he was surprised that I even knew him, and then he was surprised that I studied most of his classes. And so he's working on the Buddhist script, the Tripitaka.
Yeah,
it's all these old, and what he's trying to do is find code. He thinks that there's a code written in there of secret messages. And so he's trying to you know, and so like when I was talking to him about my mom being a code breaker, you know, so, you know, the project kind of fell apart because of money, but so I've been in and out of Berkeley, so I'm really curious. But, you know, also that Rachel is fluent in Spanish, you know, and
yeah, you absolutely should get Rachel. She is brilliant, and her story as to how she came involved with the pioneers, how she came to know us, is brilliant. Plus her dissertation work that she's doing now, because it's on contemporary Koreans in Mexico. And the funny thing is that Rachel is how I found this podcast, because she and I have been talking about, you know, telling the woman's story, writing an article, trying to get this out, what avenue would be appropriate for it. You know, she and I just, I mean, you know, I just adore her. I think she's just phenomenal. And so we were talking about, you know, maybe we should do a podcast. Maybe that would be the easiest way to get these thoughts or have this conversation. And then I'm looking on Spotify and I'm like, Flip Cuddy, wait, what? And
I don't advertise that much because I'm afraid what people are having.
Yeah. So then I started listening to everything that I thought was relevant, you know, to my story. And then talked to Han what was that, like 2.5 hours?
Yeah, 2.5 hours. Yeah.
And then you betrayed me with the princess thing.
No, I'm sorry. It was perfect. I'm sorry. Trying to up your I'm wearing my Disney shirt.
Wait a minute.
Not.
You'll learn something about Han so you can get even.
I'm gonna start writing stuff down, but yeah, Rachel. I mean, Rachel is one of my favorite people. Anytime I get frustrated with something, I need something, you know, she just has such a wonderful analytical mind to process it quickly and throw it right back. And she, I can't say enough great things about her.
That's good. That's encouraging. You know, the one thing I told her too, I go, you know, one of the things that I appreciated about what she was writing is that she understands the first people that came to Mexico and Hawaii and California were sojourners, which meant they weren't immigrants. You know, they didn't plan to stay here. You know, so if she's got that concept as part of, you know, she's you know, and the immigrant word is more of a word that's used here than, you know, like the Koreans in Korea are going, why the hell are they having a centennial? Who cares if it's been 100 years? And these people got faked into going to Hawaii. You know? But it was I mean, it was a gimmick. It was a marketing ploy by the state of Hawaii and a couple of greedy South Korean immigrants that were connected to the University of Hawaii, and they conjured up this story because at that time the Korean government had just changed the visa and the United States had waived the limit on the visa, so they were expecting this big boon of travel. And so when I worked on it, you know, as a matter of fact, a woman that was working at the Korean American Museum, where I was the first executive director, what a mess that is, sent me a book that my mom had loaned them years ago. I just got it.
You mentioned in the beginning.
Yeah, you know, so it's like, you know, it was so funny. But I worked on that in 1993, actually before 93, because the book was published in 93, and it was the 10-year warm-up to the 2003 Centennial of Hawaii only. And the people I worked with were an advertising agent and a reporter from the Korea Times and a marketing, these are Korean nationals at the Hangul Gilbo there, the Korea Times, and another lady who immigrated who was the advertising director for the Ala Moana Shopping Center. You know, so then the Koreans here and the Koreans in Hawaii got together and turned it into the immigration to the United States. And it just was like, I wrote did I send you that paper?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's where it started. That's where I had already been on a mission, but that really, I mean, that's been.
I think there is something, you know, for the contributions back to not forgetting Korea and Korea not forgetting about them, because she continued to check on them and be concerned. And that compassion, that commitment is certainly something that I identify more with the Korean side, you know, that wanting to share, to help, not all of them, but at least that was in my experience. And also, I mean, I love all of the Korean Americans and Korean Mexicans saying, screw you, Japan, we don't recognize you. You're not acting on our behalf. Because that was such an interesting part of it, that every time, you know, the what happened in Rivers, I think it was Riverside, right? With there was a labor dispute, or there was something, someone had been a victim of a violence or something, and Japan tried to intercede, and the Korean Americans said, "Screw you."
Oh, that was one of them was the Hemet incident.
Yeah, yeah.
June 23rd, 1913, I think.
Yeah, no. I love all that. I mean, even the census, you know, they would try to say that they were still saying they were Korean citizens, to the point where people were telling them, "You don't have a country," and they're saying,
"Oh
back
yeah,
for you, we do have a country, and she still exists, and it's not Japan." So
yeah, I was just reading like what you're saying is in the group, the Kongnip Hyope, that the ginseng merchant reported to, were having demonstrations in San Francisco over the Protectorate Treaty and other things. I mean, and they were demonstrating, you know, it's just like you're saying, you know, trying to, well, my grandfather had that pro-Japanese white guy assassinated in front of the ferry building.
yeah, I wasn't sad to read about that. I mean,
Oh, that's exciting to me. I mean, because, you know, people compare Tosan to Gandhi and Martin Luther King and this nonviolent stuff, right? Tosan was passive as much as he could be, but I mean, it was a military takeover of Korea. They lost their country, you know, and the only way was to have some acknowledgement of an army movement, and that's why he created the Independence Army and the great Independence War Plan, but also doing 6 or 7 other things: is education, economy, religion, you know, everything was the big ball of wax. But yeah, that's not the only guy he had assassinated. You know? So I don't know, but yeah, now you know, I know you, I thought you would find your is it your grandfather and his brother that are missing? Yeah, I thought you might find them, but for you to have gone and learned more and find that they've been omitted really irks my curiosity. Irks not the right word. Sparks my curiosity.
Yeah, and my great grandfather also, right? So there are these 3 Korean. I've kind of accepted that the women I found information on because of who they married.
Right.
So they were documented through their spouses, and their children were documented too. But you know, it begs the question. I know it's not perfect. It was a huge task to undertake, but it just to know that I'm part of this history and that he's not part of the story yet. That's tough. It's tough. And his brother. And my great grandfather, right? So I do this, and it may not go anywhere. I may just keep it for myself, but at least, you know, I will know.
I think you'll find somehow you're going to find out more, you know, because it's a specific group of people. You know, it's you know, and you're at the core of that specific group of people. Your ancestors, your great grandfather, you know, so it from that initial group, it spreads, and you got to figure that out and figure out the why. But you know, that truth doesn't change. You know, that's who you are. That's part of your family. You know, that's like with me. You know, I mean, it's like when I'm in Korea, they think I'm Hispanic or Colombian or anything but Korean. You know, and I'm the grandson of one of the greatest Koreans who ever born, and so, you know, but it doesn't do me any good because I don't look Korean. I mean, that's just the way it is, and I don't care. You know, it's.
I hope that that's changing, especially now that Korea's having a population problem. You know, they seem to be more welcoming to people from other places and other cultures, and I think, you know, people want to one up each other for some really weird reason. I don't understand it, but I know that, you know, my college thing, because for me to say I'm Latina, I was like, haha, funny too. But, you know, I speak Spanish, my socioeconomic qualifications at the time, you know, I didn't have that experience where I was rejected by my own community. But I know that it happens, right?
I was talking to the new guy on the street here. He's 68. He's been around the valley for a long time. I said, hey man, when I moved in here, there was a petition to keep us out of the neighborhood because it was all white. You know, and then the other thing they didn't know that there was a dirt road, and then down the street was a 10-acre chicken ranch. I mean, I grew up in a tract home built in 1960 in the middle of corn and squash. We had our own motocross track out here. Now it's all 7-Eleven and in and out, and you know, but man, it was great growing up here in the country. And my uncle moved out here because he was so tired of the Korean community downtown. And so it's interesting what happens, but no, and you know, the other thing that's good is that you connected with Rachel. You know, what are the odds, you know, that she speaks Spanish fluently?
Yeah, well, you know, I'll let her tell her story.
Yeah, no, please. I mean, you know, I look forward to having both of you on the same meeting, you know, and yeah, because you know, basically it's your guys' turn. Good luck. You know?
Oh, I just met Hans. I'm hoping he'll stay part of.
Oh, he's stuck.
I'm
He is stuck.
I'm stuck. I'm starting the support group, so
You're starting the support group.
yeah.
Then you, me, and Rachel can start. You know,
Well, I actually think, and then the next one we should do with Kyung-Soo Min and the Taiwanese Kelly Lan, you know, that are writing the book, because that's the, you know, I know what I know. I'm still learning. I'm still contributing. I'm done. You know, the universities are shut down. I mean, if I go on any kind of group thing, it's going to be on one of these, you know, for a while. I mean, I wrote a distance learning program for an institute in 1996. I'm surprised that it hadn't, you know, and back then the problem technology was so expensive. You know, now it's dirt cheap, you know, so I don't understand. You know, I know it's tough for everybody, but, you know, this is a big time, a big change, a big shift in the world. You know, I mean, it just.
And the last thing I'll say about the Koreans is when Joseph June was in San Diego 2 separate times, he dragged me, well, not dragged me, he invited me to 2 events. One, he was speaking about the 1992 riots to a group of Korean youth here in San Diego, and then the premiere of Geronimo here in San Diego.
Wait a minute, what did he say about the riots?
So that's kind of where he started. And he had like a short film and a study that he did, you know, and he talked a lot about what happened to the Korean community in there, and also raised the issue of the dynamic within the Korean community that kind of contributed to that animosity between the 2 groups. So it was really
it's 3 groups.
3 groups.
Blacks, Hispanics, and Koreans. Don't forget, Koreatown is all Central American.
Right, but I mean, I think
when you look at who was looting.
Yes, who was looting? Yes, but you know, the murder of the girl in the store.
Oh, Latasha Harlins. That, you know who I blame the riot on? Is the judge. Right, for sure, for absolutely, for not giving us. I mean, there's so many things, but that's what Joseph brought up there, and so. But what I wanted to say about the Koreans that I've met here, and there were recent Koreans, and then there were the movie was more kind of college educated, is that they were wonderful, and they were so welcoming to me and my family, like to a point where we were completely. My kids were like, "What is happening?" Like they wanted to talk to us, they wanted to know our story. It was really. We were really overwhelmed by just how much they were touched with what was in Joseph's film, and just that they even cared. It was that's one reason I took myself out of the film, is because I lectured Joseph in 2007 at the University of Washington, and basically, you know, he was interested in history, but what he learned from me got him a little more interested in history. And he went on, and he knew my feelings about the Korean Centennial and Korean American Day, and it's all based on BS. And so, and I saw him in Atlanta just recently, you know, and I have no issue with him as a person, but I told him, I go, you know, my feelings And because you're so charismatic and influential and people are listening to you, you're disseminating things that aren't true, you know, and I can't go against sure, I want to be in the documentary. Sure, I want people to see me. Sure, I want people to hear my opinion, but I'm not going to cross if I have to question my ethics over this, that's the decision I made. It wasn't because I didn't like or disrespect Joseph.
Well, Joseph was promoting that 100 centennial.
The
Korean
centennial, he was promoting Korean American Day.
Yeah, he was.
I mean, heavily. Because at every event he went to, he was promoting it. And I just said, look, I can't do this. And we had, I mean, that interview is gold. He did it here in this living room, him and his brother and another guy. It was really, there was a lot of information. And when I told him I wanted out, he thought I wanted out because Ed Chang was in it. I go, no. Ed Chang deserves every bit of, airtime he can muster up. I go, no, this is the deal over Korean American Day, because I'm going to sit there, and my grandparents came here in 1902, and Korean American Day is based on Koreans coming in 1903. The president of the United States writes that January 13th, 1903 is the exact day that the first Koreans set foot in America. Koreans owned a legation in 1887 in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
My grandfather's group owned a building in San Francisco in 1905. 165 Koreans came before. So I just had to draw the line. But I'm really glad that Joseph did what he did, because that movie with what Geronimo Lim did really opened up the eyes of the youth, because like every showing that he made had a really good reception, and even in Atlanta, and he's one of the main players in what happens with this heritage, and our ties are severed. But I can't disrespect my family, and want some kind of recognition for what, But I still, whatever silver lining there is on what I just said, he's really made a difference in opening up people's attention, making them aware. And but it was funny because I was on Facebook, and all of a sudden he was looking at stuff and he was writing, and I sent him some pictures of Mexico, of Tucson in Mexico, and he's asking me some more questions, and all of a sudden he goes, "Are you Philip Cuddy?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, that's when, we started talking back and forth, that I had lectured him in 2007, and then again at UC San Diego a few years later. But no, it's so.
I think the film, one of the big takeaways was that I think Geronimo always lived his life by what he felt was in the best interest of his people, his community. And whether or not you agreed with what side he was in the revolution or not, I have no doubt that he did what he believed, and I think that raises the question, right? When people have different political beliefs, have different appreciations for different things, that they can still be a good person. And you may not agree with them, or they may have made a mistake or been deceived. It depends on your perspective, right? Because it really depends on what kind of side you're on. And that was the beauty of it, because there were Cuban descendants at the viewing here in San Diego, and it was interesting to see how they were the ones that got exiled during the revolution. So for them to sit through the film and not walk away, and still kind of look past a lot of what they need to look past what affected them personally, and still, appreciate the story, and I thought it was really well done. But
I know that his brother, who filmed a lot with him, I think they're both lawyers, but his brother was really good at what he did with the camera too. It was amazing. But well, have you talked to him recently?
He's in Korea right now with the film again. Yeah, we text every once in a while. You know, because he was in Korea, I was kind of more like, well, what can you get me this book? You know, this book in Korean. You know, he's always been very receptive and very kind with his time for me.
Oh
But
no, he's a great. It's just a kind individual. There's no doubt about it. You know, but I'm just telling you, you know, my reason for yanking myself out of the film. You know, it's just it. You know, that's how I am. I mean, I don't think my grandfather would have done that. You know, I think he would have had it, but I'm not diplomatic. I don't pretend to be.
you're not
You know?
diplomatic.
I'm not. You know, man, I used to just pound the crap out of people, you know, constantly because I had to fight when I was a kid because of my race,
Yeah.
you know, all the time. And then I had to fight with Koreans, you
Right.
know, so, you know, I go to Korea. They don't like me because of my hair. They don't like me because I'm half. I have a job. I have my own car. I was all league in football. I was a senior class president. I was one of the smartest kids in the class. I went to one of the best high schools in all of the United States, probably all the world. And these little rats are telling me I'm not good enough. You know, so that chip on my shoulder. I mean, I got treated so poorly, but it really didn't bother me. You know, my sister did too. You know, and my sister was one of the first women to be let into Harvard. She was who's who in high school in the United States. And so they were ragging on her because she wanted to wear pants because it was cold. So she had a pantsuit and that was unacceptable. She said, screw you guys. You know, so that's, you know, there's,
And they shook hands with the dictator, Park Chung-hee.
oh yeah, he just like, they cut out the picture of the people in the background, the head of the CIA and his other guy, those guys got blown up. But yeah, you know, but you know, that was part of this constant chronology of this history that I was involved with, and you know, nothing can change it. Like I went to this one really, really wealthy guy's place, and we were having dinner, and everybody ate. And then they, you know, get to the women thing. They made the women go in another room after dinner, and all the men went to another. I had to go with the women. I was having a great time, you know. And my mom was there, my sister, you know, and all these attractive daughters of these people, you know. I'm just, you know, and so they didn't like the fact that I was okay with it, and they made me go sit in another room by myself, and I just said "F you guys" and left. And they were looking for me. I was just walking around the neighborhood. So it's a long history that's made me not diplomatic. So, and just, you know, the museum is one thing and the memorial hall is another. You know, 1992, you know, my mom and I used to lick the envelopes and stamps on hundreds of invitations to things at a time, and you know, to watch what's happened to it and to be not in existence, and then to have the KNA Memorial Hall, you know, when you called, somebody only speaks Korean, you know, and that place, hardly anybody spoke Korean to outsiders or to people that contacted them, you know, because, you know, can you imagine in the early 1900s, Yoboseo? You know, it's like, you know, and assimilation was, but that's the difference between our pioneer types and the South Korean immigrants, you know. But I know who answered the phone, and I know where he was sitting. Han, same thing happened to Han. Did he tell you that?
Yeah, I went there unexpectedly, and soon as I entered, I got kicked out because I didn't set up an appointment. It was hilarious, but it was it my fiance could tell me, would say I was really angry. I was just like so
Disappointed.
disappointed at how they utilize that historic place, like not open to the public. You know, it could be used they could have youth programs and things like that, but no, it's just
I was supposed to be the first executive director of it, but the South Koreans refused. They, because they knew I would make it more Western. But I used to go there when I was a kid. My grandmother used to take me there. We used to go have barbecues there and karate, taekwondo exhibits, and it's and the churches were funny. But and some of the people that the women who got married into the United States group from Mexico, they were part of that church. But part of that was to make it was the family immigration chain type of a thing back then. That there was a strategy to it. I mean, I don't know if Billy's grandmother's marriage was pleasant, because some of them weren't. Just in general, because my grandmother was the one who got all the domestic counseling, like women would be beaten, and guys would get drunk. That some of them were unruly, and, they would come to my grandmother, but treatment of women is in Korean history is not, good, basically. But, what's funny though is Korea used to be a matriarchal society. And then it changed at some point. But no, I think we should, whatever you do, like if we should network for you, for Rachel, and if you come up with an all women's group, more power to you. I think it's good.
We're not going to be all women, Flip. Let's not get crazy. We might have just you two as the only men, but no, I'm just kidding. It's just been it's something that it's crazy that we're still dealing with, but at least we're talking about it now.
That's good. That's good. As my grandmother's the one that saved all this stuff. I don't know how she, from the late 1800s, all of a sudden the light went on. She goes, I need to save this stuff.
The foresight, yeah.
I think her collection of letters from my grandfather starts, 1902. Yeah. And like I said, my mom's was the driving force of the preservation. So, but no, that's when people call me up in the beginning, it's like, oh, this is going to be a roll of the dice, to see how that person is and what they really can find out. And, yours has been a good roll. It's like you're constantly moving forward, and, just, and Han has too, but, Han has a lot of other things going on, but, like we did a lot of the UCLA, USC, some college kid stuff. And, there's a few that are serious, and those are the ones that we have to help you connect with, because it's going to be that group of people that are, I would say, more sincere, because there's a lot of fun to be had too. It's like, it's just, I could be serious and whiny a lot, but I like to have fun too. So
when we created this group here in San Diego, that's what we're saying. Like, if nothing else, all of the elders are going to make food for us, and we're going to get.
Yeah. Hey, let me know. I'll drive on down.
Yeah, you need to meet this group. It is really remarkable that we all ended up and like to recognize yourself and someone else who you've never met, but somehow you have a similar experience and similar stories. And we talk about how therapeutic this has been, for all of us to know that we have similar stories, similar issues, and that somehow we are all finding each other now, because it's kind of bizarre. But at the very least, we're going to have a party, and I hope Han comes. Flip, maybe you guys can come together just to meet each other and to eat the food, because it's still different for us, right? The ingredients taste different. We go to Korean restaurants, it's awesome, but it's not our heritage cooking.
Looking forward to it.
Like Billy's mom makes a kalbi marinade that I remember that has no sugar in it.
Yeah.
You know, that was the, because the sugar really wasn't part of Korean diet until the Japanese introduced it. You know, so my mom, when we have like certain kalbis and stuff that used to, had a lot of sugar, she was, eh. But one time we had a barbecue here and Billy brought over some of his, I think did his mom pass away yet?
No.
No, Gloria's still kicking.
Alive.
So she must be close to 100.
Yeah.
I think she turned 100 recently.
Yeah.
Or is going to.
My mom used to mentor her. She was in a girls group that my mom created out of the YWCA. That's the Girl Reserves or something like that. So it's pretty funny. But well, good. This is great. See, it was easy.
Right. Just the 2 hours just flew by.
Oh, we've been on 2 hours?
Yeah.
Well, I told Ron, let's try to keep it to an hour.
I know, but we just...
we didn't.
That was my 2 points. I'm sorry.
No. It's
oh, no, not at all. Not at all.
No, because, it's just, I mean, we could go farther, but we'll do it again. But, that's what happens, because when you get on a roll on this thing, time flies. We've had quite a few episodes. This is one of the better episodes we've had in a while. And like you're right, without Sophia, we're unbalanced.
That was a secret too. God, you guys are like not. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding.
I apologize for the other. I didn't know that was anyway. All right, should we end it here, folks?
Yes.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Okay. Well, thank you, Diana, for joining us. Thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, please email, and then we'll connect. All right. Have a good one, folks.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Diane.
Thank you. Good night.